Thank you very much. I'll be starting off today, and I'm sorry for everyone getting sick of Australian accents in these presentations today. So, thank you very much. My name is Dr. George Aranda. I'll be presenting today with Julianne Lynch. I'll get us started, and Julie will take us through some of the data that we have collected as part of this presentation today. So, what we're looking at here are, as the title indicates, contextual dimensions of out-of-field teaching in computer science, implications for socio-cultural techno futures. Now, just to note, as it indicates at the bottom of the screen there, that computer science is currently called digital technologies in the Australian and Victorian curricula. And we'll be talking from our context in Victoria more specifically. Next slide, Julie. Now, what we have here on the text there is the rationale for the digital technologies uh, uh, as part of the Victorian curriculum. So, digital technologies empower students to shape change by influencing how contemporary and emerging information systems and practices are applied to meet current and future needs, provide students with practical opportunities to use design thinking and to be innovative developers of digital solutions within an ethical framework, considering safety by design principles. And I guess this part is the most important. Helps students to become innovative creators of digital solutions, effective users of digital systems, and critical consumers of information conveyed by digital systems. So this really, just putting this on the screen to really give you an idea of the breadth of things that are meant to be covered in the digital technologies curriculum. Next slide, please. Now, in Australia, the reality is that children don't generally have access to computer science education, and very few teachers in Australia will have had exposure to computer science in their own formal education. That is, that most people, including non-specialist teachers, hold quite narrow stereotypical views of the field. Now, computer science has a low status compared to many other school subjects, and many people confuse computer science with learning how to operate digital technologies such as iPads, smartphones, and even to the point some people confuse it with using Excel or other software like Word and those kinds of things. Many of those who understand it is a specialist field, conflate computer science with learning how to program computers and with the ideas of programming and coding being quite predominant in the area. Now, in Australia, there are very few training pathways for computer science specialist teachers, and quite often those positions that are advertised are extremely hard to fill. Now, most teachers of computer science are self-taught, therefore they're teaching out of field. Now, teachers of computer science commonly do not have any other colleagues with which to bounce ideas off. They're the computer science teacher at their school. Now, computer science curriculum enactment in schools varies widely, quite often with primary schools not planning to do any or assess computer science learning. And quite often, computer science is an elective in secondary, and quite often it's not really taught beyond years 7 and 8 and is not offered at all in senior years, year 11 and 12. Next slide, please, Julie. Now, the research context we're coming from is we were responsible for a government-funded project to design, deliver, and investigate a re-specialization course, which was a graduate certificate in secondary digital technologies for out-of-field secondary computer science teachers in Victoria, Australia. Now, 30 teachers completed the course, one unit at a time, over 2 years. Now, their experience with computer science varied quite a lot, with some less than 12 months and others with greater than 5 years of experience. And their in-field qualifications varied as well, maths, science, English, etc. And of course, the location where their schools were located varied quite a great deal as well, being metropolitan, regional, and remote schools. Now, for the purposes of this research, 12 of those teachers, about 40%, consented to participate in design-based research. Now, we examine views, experiences, and outcomes for enrolled teachers via surveys, interviews, and submitted assessment tasks generated across the life of the course. Now, the teachers had to do their assessment tasks were hurdle tasks, and the enrolled teachers completed a range, a different number of tasks, and this has to do with the assessment how assessments were done, and we can talk about that in question time if you are interested. Now, each hurdle task prompted descriptions of and reflection on their school settings, experiences of teaching computer science in their school, experiences and learning outcomes in the course, and experience and impacts of putting that learning into practice. So it was very much a practical kind of experience that they had. Content of written reflections suggests that teachers shared candid reflections, and I'll give you an example of this in a moment. For example, instances of criticisms of their school, the department, or the course itself, which was quite eye-opening for us as those teaching the course, and instances of personal disclosure, including their own personal failures, any anxieties they had about what they were doing, and any biases from various experiences that they'd had. Now, these reflections are a rich source of insights into factors experiencing the teacher's engagement, learning, and professional practice over the 2-year period of the course. Now, an example of one of the assessment tasks, hurdle tasks that we asked them to do was a very simple one: prepare a brief email introducing yourself to the unit chair. To help us get to know you, in your email, consider the following questions. What experience do you have teaching data and information concepts? And that's what the unit was. How would you rate your current level of knowledge for teaching in this area on a scale of 1 to 10? And what is your target grade? So in this course, the teachers were able to nominate the grade that they were trying to achieve. Here, you might want to share any professional, personal pressures on your time, as well as reflections on your learning experience in Unit 1 and how these are shaping your choice. Now, underneath is a quote from one of the teachers. I am a 4th-year mathematics teacher that lives out in regional Victoria. I was roped into teaching. So it's kind of roped in. I was pushed into teaching an internet website design course after the last teacher left and the alternative teacher was in their 60s and, well, was less than proficient with technology, shall we say. I didn't have much experience, mind you, but I did a coding course that I had promptly forgotten in university, and that put me at the top of the list. I don't seem to have done as badly as I thought, or the other teachers are all terrified of coding because they kept me in the class, and I seem to be locked in as a backup teacher now. And I'm sure we can all kind of understand this experience of, okay, you've done a little bit of coding, you're the coding teacher, or you're the computer science teacher in this case. And and you can see that's quite a candid kind of response, and a lot of the responses from the teachers were very, very honest in that kind of way, which is quite gave us great insight into their experiences. Julie? Now, for our analytical focus, I'll just give you a brief setup. So we were very much interested in looking at the teacher reflections on the hurdle tasks using Braun's 4-dimensional framework of school context. So there are 4 there that you can see on the screen. The first one is the external context. So this could be the local authority support, the broader policy kind of pressures and issues, the legal requirements that are required. The material context has to do with more specific things like school budgets, buildings, infrastructure, equipment. How do they constrain what can be done? Professional context, such as school priorities, the teacher expertise themselves, policy management by leadership, collegiality, and professional ethos, as well as teacher roles. And then finally, the situated context, where the school is located in space, where it's located in time, maybe the history of the school in this kind of way, as well as the influence of intake of students and the community it resides in. I'll hand over to Julie.
Okay, thank you, George. So I'm going to quickly run through these main themes for each of the dimensions of context before I move on to the interrelations between the dimensions, which is something we're really interested in to see how school context makes a difference, and the interrelations play out quite differently for different teachers at different schools. And then I'll come to, hopefully if I have time, I guess some insight that this school context difference really is significant in subjects like computer science, similarly to Donna's area of home economics, these marginalised areas that are not part of the Common Core. I've been reflecting on Donna's presentation and thinking, even though home economics is a very traditional, well-established, long-established course and sort of field. Computer science, which is a much newer one, suffers some similar issues due to status and misunderstandings of the field. So just quickly, these are some of the things that emerged, and these would be recognisable, I'd imagine, for many fields in terms of the features of these different dimensions of context that shape the enactment of curriculum. So, of course, we have formal curriculum framework. The teachers that we have in our course were out-of-field teachers teaching years 7 to 10. So a new formal curriculum in Victoria was of much interest to them. Some of them were also interested in and influenced by the senior level curriculum, the Victorian Certificate of Education, if they had an offering in their school. But again, because this is a fairly marginalised, low participation area of study, that wasn't a factor for teachers if they didn't attract a cohort or offer senior subjects. Regulations and new policies around using digital technologies was impactful. In terms of the material, I think they're the sort of things that you would expect to see. Time, whenever you talk to teachers, time is the most important resource. And of course, it comes up in subjects that are trying to argue for more time in the timetable and for more time and in out-of-field contexts where teachers need time to come to grips with disciplinary knowledge and to do curriculum translation. Infrastructure, digital equipment, those sorts of things. The professional context, whether or not leadership at the school or department leaders, if they happen to be, if the teacher sat in a department, whether those leaders valued computer science or not as a field. Whether there were opportunities to collaborate with colleagues was an important aspect in the professional context, particularly as George introduced. In many cases, there is one teacher responsible for teaching computer science because the offerings at the school are quite limited. So there is no team and there is no one to bounce ideas off. And also another aspect of the professional context is those sort of, I guess, perceptions found among teachers and leaderships of the students in that particular setting. And those perceptions are different from school to school. And the sorts of assumptions, I guess, are different from school to school. And then the situated context, things of interest were students' prior learning, whether the teachers saw them as presenting at the secondary school as ready to learn secondary curriculum in computer science, and also whether they saw the local community and the students in their school as having an interest or as the curriculum area being relevant to them. The parent community, socio-educational or socioeconomic status was seen as something that had a shaping influence in terms of the way curriculum was seen and enacted. And also in terms of relevance and whether teachers and schools valued and saw computer science as relevant, nearby industries influenced those sort of perceptions and where they sort of anticipated or expected the children in the school would go to look for careers and or vocations and employment. So we want to look at how these different dimensions of context featured in teachers' reflective accounts of enacting computer science curriculum. Remembering that computer science as a field is emphasised in government discourse. If you remember back to the first slide showing the rationale and a strong argument for the importance of computer science or digital technologies, knowledge for all children. But in contrast to that sort of public discourse and government discourse, it has a low status among other fields that are seen as part of the core. So, for example, there's subjects like subject English and also mathematics. So looking at the quote on the screen, and this is just our initial, I guess, interpretation and preliminary interpretations and analysis of these data. The course is about to finish, so we're still finalising our data. So this teacher, who's from a socio-educationally disadvantaged school, says most teachers at my school acknowledge and adhere to policies and curriculum documentation, but there's a strong culture of professional autonomy, with many educators interpreting and adapting these guidelines to suit their teaching style and student needs. And they go on to emphasise the collaborative nature of the professional context and the very supportive nature. And I've done in my, I guess, these tentative interpretations and analyses, thinking about how the different contexts are interrelating. And this quote describes a relationship between the external context, policy, curriculum, documentation, and the professional context, teaching style, and also the situated context represented by students' needs. And the professional and the situated is sort of represented as a block that mediates the influence of external contexts. And this is quite particular. Not all schools would have this sort of supportive environment where there is scope for teachers to put their own spin on curriculum and to have opportunities to collaborate in a supported way. Interestingly, this next short quote is from the same teacher, so in the same school. However, this one specifically refers to the material context for teaching computer science and limitations due to the very little time allocated to the subject in the timetable. So school timetables are very powerful. They operate as a professional material block that shapes the roles and the resources, and they reflect the relative valuing and the power of subjects, with some subjects being allocated more time than others. Limited time allocated to teach computer science was a very common complaint of the teachers in the course. However, the external forces contributing to this material professional constraint rarely featured in teachers' reflections. Instead, this unevenness in the resourcing of subjects was taken for granted and sort of as a given context that would not change. So even in this collaborative, supportive, sort of teacher-centred professional environment, it was very, very constraining in terms of having time with students to teach the content. Okay, so this teacher, this time looking at focusing on the professional context, is from a different school. And this teacher identified tensions and contradictions within the external and professional contexts, where the focus of the school leadership is on one external factor, in particular school level measures of student outcomes, while the teaching staff is focused on another external factor, revising plans and resources for teaching a new state curriculum. So these tensions were described as contributing to staff burden, low trust in the school, and a sense of overwhelm when translating the external context into their school setting. So contrast with the first example, where the professional context was sort of a mediating factor of sort of things coming down the line to teachers. Okay, and now the situated context. So both these quotes, these two quotes, reference the situated context, namely teachers' perceptions of community and student need and capability. The quotes suggest very different relationships between the situated context and the professional contexts at each of these schools. In the first quote, the teacher's perceptions of the student's needs is influenced by the socioeconomically disadvantaged rural location and it manifests as a deficit view and a remedial approach to curriculum provision, where there's talk of teaching digital literacy, which is not really teaching this curriculum area. The other quote, in an advantaged urban school, manifests in an aspirational school culture with high expectations of students through which external contexts are then mediated. So unsurprisingly, I've shared a few interpretations here and some of our sort of preliminary insights. The professional context is the primary reference point for these teachers when they're reflecting on their computer science teaching. And you know that should come to no surprise. It is their day-to-day workplace, and it involves their leadership and their allocations and their collegial relationships and the values and ethos of the school. The material context has the most direct influence on these out-of-field computer science teachers in terms of being an effect of the professional context. So it rolls down particularly into how much time they have to teach, what sort of subject offerings are available, whether those subjects have an elective status, whether there's a vision of growing the field, whether there's offerings at the VCE level, those sorts of things. The influence of the external context on professional context was largely unacknowledged. Of course, there was reference to curriculum documents in a time of change and to things like NAPLAN, but that sort of epistemic politics, that's power difference between subjects and subject traditions, was pretty much taken for granted as an immutable sort of large context that wasn't going to change. However, professional context in some schools did mediate the impact of this in supportive ways. In terms of interrelations between the professional context and situated context, these, particularly if you think back to the two quotes that I contrasted, one from an advantaged school and one from a disadvantaged school, the professional context can really, and the way the situated context is interpreted and the sorts of values and beliefs that teachers have can perpetuate inequities in students' access to computer science curriculum. And this is really important in this sort of subject, which it really is still, even though there is a mandated curriculum through to year 10, with sort of some understanding that year 9 and 10 can be elective, there is such great variation in how it is enacted that when schools have particular, assumptions about what their student clientele are interested in or will be served by, then they're likely to perpetuate, advantages by teaching high-level, sort of aspirational, empowering computer science curriculum to their students, compared with a sort of deficit approach where they don't see that this curriculum area is relevant to the students, or the students are not ready to learn it. Okay, now I'll look at the time. Final thoughts. I might just stop there because otherwise there will be no time for comments or questions. I'll leave that one on the screen for a minute.